Announcements here real quick. Just to make sure that everybody knows who's in what rooms, when, where, and why. Right now, we have 3 different tracks. We talked about it yesterday a little bit. Some different names got thrown out for who was downstairs in the nightclub versus who was here versus who's over there. So, Hudson Harris, HIPAA, Wrath of the Audits, nightclub. Oh, by the way, nightclub has cash bar going on during the talks. Plan accordingly. Did half the room just leave? Yeah. Sorry, Kevin. In the room next to us is the automatic static malware. Basically, it's the high schoolers telling you really cool stuff about malware. It's an interesting talk. Catch the video. In this room, we have Kevin Cardwell, who I will introduce, and this is an excellent talk. At 3:15 in the nightclub will be Evan Booth, one of our keynotes from last year, talking about the fixing the fan in the post-poop scenario. It's a good talk. In this room, in the room next to us will be forensic artifacts of the host-guest interaction in the VM environment by Kurt Abishan. And in this room at 3:15 will be Johnny Christmas. That's not my RJ45 jack in real life networking for humans, which rocks. At 4:10 in this room, there will be this guy named Ben doing the Great Trojan demo. In the room next to us will be Rocky Brockway doing enterprise class vulnerability management. And downstairs in the nightclub will be the man, the myth, the legend, Iron Geek, Adrian, talking about history and hashes. So the book is what's right. If you have one of these, you have the right schedule, contrary to what a couple people said. Another announcement, apparently we had another giveaway. And so Varonis is outside there, and they have a $100 Visa gift card for, they texted me the name. Sorry, one second. Oh, good. Shouldn't take me that long to enter the PIN in my phone, should it? They texted me the name. It's a $100 Visa gift card from Varonis. So Tim Benish. Tim is in another room. Okay, cool. So that's taken care of. The 3 different talks, cash bar downstairs, Kevin. Okay, so we'll talk about how much Kevin rocks. So the man, the myth, the legend here right now is Kevin Cardwell. He has an extremely long list of accolades that I'm not even going to try and sum up. Just when he talks, people listen, and people with a lot of degrees and stars on their shoulders, and or however they decorate themselves when they're really high up military professionals. He taught a network defense class in the last 2 days that people were coming out of and going, "Oh my God, we have to fix our networks right now and build them better." So Kevin's somebody I've known for a few years now. He's really cool and fun to hang out with also. So please welcome Kevin Cardwell. Thanks.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So what I want to talk about is building an actual cyber range. And what I get asked all the time, well, if you build it, is it for pen testing or is it for defense? And the answer is both. When you build the range, you can actually attack it, you can defend it, you can do anything you want to do with it. The only limit is your imagination. Okay. So there's about me. I'm not going to talk too much about me. It's the modern day search on the internet. About 50% of what you find will probably be true. Half of it will tell you that I work for people. I don't work for anybody. I have my own company, and I'm freelance. So even though all these people say that I work for them, I don't do that. Okay. One of the big things is virtual machines, right? Creating your virtual machine. So what we want to do is we want to build an actual range that we can carry on our laptop. That's the most common one that I train people to build, because then you can practice all these different techniques, all right? So I prefer VMware Workstation. I know a lot of people like VirtualBox, they like the open source, that type of stuff, and that's fine. It doesn't matter what software you use as long as it meets your needs, all right? The problem I have with the open source ones, most of them don't emulate the hypervisor well enough to do the routers and all that type of stuff. So that's kind of why I stick with virtual VMware, all right? You can do new, you can clone, or you can convert. Okay, new, it has this wizard in there, and like most wizards, it's okay, but I recommend you actually don't use the wizard, because the easy install wizard sets up things, doesn't customize it the way you want to set up your environment, right? So those types of things. The thing is, though, with VMware Workstation, you can build very complex architectures. I'm going to show you that here momentarily, where we can build an architecture equivalent to an enterprise all on one laptop. The custom is the preferred method, as I said, allows you to SCSI or an IDE virtual disk. A lot of your Linuxes, Unix, that type of stuff, you might have to change from the default SCSI to an IDE. Sometimes the actual SCSI drive won't be recognized. It's easy enough. It just comes up. It doesn't recognize the hard drive. You delete the hard drive and add a new one, IDE, and it works. The cloning is the feature that I really like, because you can create an actual either a linked clone or a full clone. Of course, we want the full clone because it doesn't have to have the original machine. And what I do is I build all these virtual machines, and I'll show you actually a picture of that here in a little while, where I have a virtual machine for pretty much any environment I'm testing. So I've been doing security testing, pen testing, whatever name you want to give it to today, for 25 years, when it wasn't called penetration testing. We called it security testing. And we have virtual machines for any environment we run into. So we can identify, okay, we know this architecture is there. We will build a virtual machine specific for that environment. What that does is it allows me to keep all my actual testing in a very neat box, as I say. Because otherwise, you get these tools and you run these big things, right? So when I was doing my training before the con, I asked this question, and it's a legitimate question. I do a lot of testing of banks, stock markets, all these other types of things. So how many of you out there do pen testing? So several of you, right? How many of you do pen testing to actually build and compile your own exploits, your own source code? Nobody. So what I'm trying to drive at is, if you get an interpreter shell, we all use Metasploit, we love Metasploit, all that type of stuff, but have you ever looked at the source code, the Ruby script, those types of things? Because if you haven't, imagine going to run that on a bank, one of the banks in the Middle East, $1 trillion in assets. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to run a interpreter shell and do exploit and all this other type of stuff. You've got to know every line of what that code does, all right? So that's the thing. When we're doing testing, a lot of people's making a mistake. I love Metasploit, don't get me wrong, but when you start running that, you better be able to read that script and make sure something hasn't been replaced in there. Hopefully you built your own Kali box, although some people think after the Snowden links, there's the backdoors in Kali, or at least there was in Backtrack, and now that Kali's out, the backdoors are still there, that type of stuff. But the bottom line is, you have to validate that. That's another reason to build your own cyber range. Before you run these tools, make sure you understand every line of code. All right? Now, how many know Ruby and know how to read Ruby script? Now, a few of you, right? If you don't, that's where you have to either get educated or to get somebody to audit those exploits. Because if you just start running those exploits off of Metasploit, you're not guaranteed what they're doing. All right? I come from a software engineering and a coding background, and I still have to go say, oh, wow, I haven't seen that type of code in a while, to figure out what it's doing. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Don't just run that Metasploit, that interpreter shell, without validating it in your toolkit. That's why you build the virtual machines. You create the virtual machine, you build and compile the actual tool you're using, and you control what it does. All right? So that's why I like the cloning, because what you can do is you can build it, and as soon as you get done, you clone it. And then you take a snapshot of it, and you've got that clean, pristine clone. No matter where you go test, whatever you do, you revert the snapshot, you've always got that code where you set it up yourself and configured it. That's the best way to do testing, especially when you have high-end clients. If you don't, make sure your errors and omission and liability insurance is paid up to date, because you might do something and they might not be happy about it. Okay, and the cloning, as I said, is just under the manage feature of the clone, pretty easy to follow. And converting. Now this one, like most things when you convert it, doesn't work 100%, but what I like about it is I can build an entire physical machine, Windows-based, of course, but I can build a physical machine with everything I want on it, convert it to a virtual machine, and I just carry it right into my virtual machine library and carry it wherever I go. All right? So it's a nice feature to have that allows you to custom build things without being in the virtual environment and then convert it to the virtual environment. So it works out really well for that. Okay. So when you build these machines, VMware creates 3 switches by default. VMnet 0 or bridged, VMnet 1 or host only, and VMnet 8 or NAT. Right? So each one of these network switches gives you the capability to emulate any type of layered defense architecture we have. And you just duplicate the different switches. So what we have on the bridge is actually physically connected to the network. This is not the one we normally use, though, because it needs a DHCP server. So since it needs a DHCP server, if you don't have one connected, then you either got to statically put it in or manually put it in, or it'll come up with the APIP address, right? The 169 address, those types of things. But what happens is when you connect into a bridged environment, you're on the physical network. So now if you're doing malware studies or stuff like that, that's probably not the best thing to do, right? So our preferred method is NAT. This is where the actual MAC address and everything is shared with the actual physical adapter, the host adapter, right? Nice thing is we still have internet access with NAT. But again, this is a dangerous switch, if you will, because if I have that connected, I can actually leak out onto the internet, right? The attacks can there. So you got to be careful with that. And then the isolation one is called host only. And that is, I can actually isolate the actual network between just virtual machines. And this is how we can set up and create complex architectures, right? So just with the default settings and the things that we have in VMware, we can set up our perimeter defense with the type of router, a firewall, a bastion host, or everything. We can do it all in virtualization, right? So what I mean is we can build this, yeah? So when you look at this, we have VMnet 0, VMnet 2, VMnet 3, so 3 switches, and the virtual bridge right there. So with 3 switches, I can create a sophisticated multi-layered architecture to include multiple firewalls. This is why we can do enterprise emulation now in any virtual environment, right? So when you look at it, we've got the actual host network adapter over here. Yeah, the host network adapter here, going through the visual bridge to the VMnet 0. So the way we set this architecture up is if I've got my attacker box out here connected to the host, I've got to go through what? Virtual machine 1, which is a firewall. That's the first thing I have to go through. So we can actually build and emulate any architecture that we're testing, we can build here in a virtual environment, right? So now after I get through that one, it's a dual home network cards. It's got the two adapters here. Now I go into the next level and I got a nice little web server here, all right? So now what I can do is I can test how's my policy coming into this web server. Does this firewall configured for the prudent approach or default deny? I'll only allow the services that needs on this web server to get to this segment and nothing else. That's how we do it from a defensive standpoint. From an offensive standpoint, I look at what can I attack, what's my vector, what's my attack surface to attack this web server. It depends how well this firewall is configured. And I get a lot of clients, and there are a lot of times there are a lot of other people that I'm training and testing. They're like, oh, wow, we ran in this environment, and it was configured pretty tough. It had good defense, had layers, had all that type of stuff. That's not a bad thing. We're not here all the time to find all the weaknesses. We're here to tell the client, you know what? You did a pretty good job in security. But the problem is, we all know one thing. We don't have perfect security. We always have to open up holes. Each one of those holes is a potential risk for exploitation, right? Our job as testers is to find if there are any holes for the client. We show them those holes and tell them what's the best recommended strategy based on their environment, right? So it's not bad when you find an environment that's actually relatively secure. It's rare you find one, but it's nice if you ever do. Okay, so now what we do is we say, okay, that's our first layer, or tier 1, if you will, a external public DMZ. People got different names for it. And the next thing we do is we come out of that and we go into another what? A firewall. Why? Architectures. If you look at the latest Cisco engineers, that type of architecture usually got one ASA, right? You got your perimeter, you got an ASA, you got some services, just like we're showing here. Then we got another ASA. Well, I think it's because they want to sell you more ASAs and Cisco products, but anyway, everybody has their view, because I would use a different firewall, not the same one, but we can emulate that entire architecture. I do a lot of work in Middle East, North Africa, India, and all those types of places. I'm telling you right now, every architecture looks like this. So every time I go into test and they show me the design or the diagram, I look at it, I says, oh yeah, that's so-and-so over the Cisco engineer from Dubai, because I recognize their work, right? This is what, when you're defending and you're on the defensive side, don't do this. Change it. Do different things. Make it harder for the attackers, all right? We want to get the basics right. It's great that I've heard all throughout the conference, everybody talking about let's get the basics right, the fundamentals. and stop always chasing the advanced persistent threat. Let's get the basic persistent threat taken care of first, and then start trying to block the advanced persistent threat, right? So finally, just on these 3 switches, I finally get down here, and I have my internal PC emulation. So just looking at this architecture, what I can do is emulate any attack or penetration testing scenario, and also emulate the what? The defense of that. So if I've got an external attacker, that's out here, right? A DMZ, web application type attacks here. I can go in here and have another type of attack in here, and then in here I can do the ever famous client side. I can start experimenting with the client side. We saw Ben 10's talk, and you looked at the PowerShell, all that type of stuff. I can set that type of attack up in here and start looking at, okay, how can I defend against it? He brought up a very good point. When you build it from the internet, it goes straight into memory. What can you do? Well, you got to have a tool that looks in memory and looks for that tool doing different types of things. So if that process does something it shouldn't do, it gives you an alert, right? But more importantly, what I teach today is we're not going to stop the users from clicking. Everybody agree the user's always going to click, right? So it's inevitable they're going to click. And if we start always trying to chase off that sophisticated malware, it's not really easy to defend against. So what do? You look for artifacts of what the malware does. So what's 2 things malware always does? It plants and tries to phone home. So that's network traffic right there. That's number 1. Number 2, it looks around to see what's around, right? So what do? We look at our network traffic going out. We do what's called black hole routing, all that type of stuff, where only the source address of the DNS server or the proxy is allowed at the perimeter. If anything else is trying to get out, we block it. That blocks 90% of the malware, okay? Inbound addresses, ingress filtering. We do a thing called bogey or bogeys. Addresses that should never be received from the internet. That blocks 64% of the malware, right? These are all things we can do to defend against different things. And then the last thing we do, we put in internal honeypots, decoys. It's what we do at LAX, what we do at other places. Because we know that some user in some terminal or somewhere in LAX is going to click on a link. When they click on a link, we're going to get a malware infection. So we've got honeypots or internal decoys that as soon as they click on that link, we identify it with the first packet. Because that machine should never receive a packet. If that machine receives a packet, you've been compromised on that segment. Segmentation, isolation. That's the way we have to do defense today. Okay. So what I took from this, I was doing a CERT, Computer Emergency Response Team, in Oman, the first one, and we needed to build a lab environment. And what it was is, they wanted to build all this really sophisticated stuff, right? And I looked at it and I said, you know, we've only got the threat analysis center, the TAC, the response center, the RC, the infrastructure, and the web. That's all we had. We had 4 entities. So what we did is, we built what you're looking at all on one machine. And we emulated the entire CERT architecture, enterprise architecture, all on one machine. And we put the hacker box out there, the external, and we always, anytime a new vulnerability came out or a new attack, we tested it in the lab environment to find out, because this is the CERT for the entire country, to find out where the actual risk was for the country from these new sophisticated attacks. If it was client side, then we went into the infrastructure, those types of things. But by doing this we've got 5 switches. With 5 virtual switches, I could emulate the entire CERT that was in this country, right? Country of Oman. So this is where you can build these cyber ranges and test the different things. The nice thing is, everybody says, well, they're all sophisticated attacks. There's this, there's that. It doesn't matter. Your architecture doesn't change. You just plug different machines into it based on what you're thinking about purchasing or what you're thinking about adding to your network. And then you look at, okay, what have I done to the risk? Right? Our job is to manage our risk. We know perfect security is not to be on the internet, but that's not going to happen. So we have to identify where's our risk at and how do we mitigate that risk, right? That's the goal of building your own cyber range, so you can control that. Okay. So if you look at this, this is just a small sample of how many virtual machines I have on that laptop you're looking at right there. Because I said I build virtual machines for every different type of environment that I test. I always, before I ever send one packet into the client's network, I've already looked at every potential vulnerability that's out there. I've looked at the code, I've validated the scripts, or I've written our own, right? We don't trust or we don't take any binaries from the internet and run them on our clients. You can't do that today, right? So you either use the commercial stuff, which is very expensive, or you audit and evaluate everything you put in your environment. And these are all my switches. So what's funny is in VMware 11, this is from VMware 11, you can have in Windows up to 20 switches. 20 switches. I can't think of any time I'd ever need 20 switches. Yeah? But in Linux, if you use a Linux host like Ubuntu or one of those, you can have 255 switches. Can anybody think about 255 layers of defense? That's a lot. Yeah? So what I've got here, I've got 10, because I'm writing a new book at the end. I'll talk about a little bit of that. And what it is these 10 switches allow me to emulate any architecture, any segment that I personally know of today. And I can do it usually with less than that, but I have some environments. I don't know, people might have some of this where they put there's the router, the firewall, where there's one layer of defense, and then some stuff, and another, and they keep layering about 10 layers down. Some of those 3-letter agencies and places like that, thinking about the more fortress mentality. The more fortress I put inside of you, the better. Then the user goes clicks, or better yet, the user just copies the stuff off and carries it out on a USB drive. Yeah? There goes all our products and all that type of stuff, right? Or my famous saying, security's not a product. It's a process. Process and methodology. Yeah? So I was over in one of the countries, and the largest telephone company provider, the ISP, has a 9-hour outage. Can you imagine AT&T or Verizon or one of them going down for 9 hours? Where you look at your phone for 9 hours and you have no signal? You try to go get your internet, you have no signal because the internet's down too. And this is the largest company or telephone company in this country. So, of course, as you know, they're looking at it, they're like, well, what do we do? Well, they find out it's a web application attack that they've been hacked by, right? So what's their response? Product. And everybody's all about product before the process is in place. So they go and spend $300,000 on a web application firewall. I'm not going to mention any names, anything, that stuff like that, because they might be out there, but I'm not going to say anything else. All right? So $300,000 on a product, and they put it in. Guess what? 4 hours later, they're down again. Why? Because most of your web application firewalls, your IPS, go into monitor, learn, or detect mode. They don't go into block mode. So they didn't have the process in place. The key is have the people, of course, and then the process, and then apply the technology. Too many people, especially in the Middle East, North Africa, India, where I do a lot of work, they just go out and buy the box, right? Well, we put the box in. It's like the old mentality, oh, we got a firewall, Kevin, we're secure. Oh, no, you need a security process, all that type of stuff in place, right? So the key is build that process into your people so the people have the process. Because I love it when you get in debates and everybody says, well, what product do you have? Well, I have product XYZ. I have product Z. It doesn't matter what product you have. It matters if you had the process in place. And then the products just help assist us in reducing and carrying out our mitigation of our risk, reducing our attack surface. That's the goal. We want to have less attack surface than the next guy, and hopefully the hacker will go after them. Okay. So the components. It should have a router. Usually we run into some router out there, some form of a router, right? You can use Dynamips. If you don't have a Cisco IOS, you can use Zero Shell. Them are different products you can use, right? Different things you can do. The main thing you want the capability of is to set up filters. Because majority of the time, we're not going to have a flat network. Everybody agree? Even though most of the contests and everything are on flat networks, but don't get me started on that. Or they put a firewall in and it's any rule. So I even have the firewall there, right? But you get what I'm saying. So what you want to do is when you lab it up is get that perimeter device. You can do it with Linux, IP tables, different types of things. And then normally you want to put in some form of a firewall. One of my favorite ones is Smoothwall, right? It's a nice free version. There's commercial versions too. And it allows me to emulate most of the architectures I want. I know pfSense, quite a few people are popular. pfSense has load balancing on it, so that's kind of nice. Additional things there. F5 now, you can go get an image and get the load balancing component of F5 for free. You can go get the virtual image. They'll give it to you for free. It's actually the load balancing component. As long as you don't really need a high-end load balancer, and on our little test network, you really don't need a high-end load balancer, so you can emulate F5 because F5 is pretty popular. Yeah? You're doing you're getting your information gathering, and you see that thing says big IP. Yeah, the big IP. Yeah, we're all seeing that big IP, all that type of stuff. F5. So again, those are the types of things you want to actually emulate. You want to be able to do that in your architecture so you know what you're going against when you do your actual test. And then do it with 3 or 4 interfaces. Red, of course, untrusted to the internet. Green, which is the internal. Orange, you're typically DMZ. And then purple can be your wireless. And so by doing that, I can emulate all 4 of those threat vectors all within one range, right? And once we build it, as I said, you just plug things into the different components or the switches of the range, and that's how you test it. Because I know Raspberry Pis, you can plug a Raspberry Pi into it. You can do all kinds of things into your test environment and test it out. In fact, last year at the Hacker Halted Capture the Flag, we did put in some Raspberry Pis. We had several Raspberry Pis. They finally found them, but we gave SSH with a username, a root, and a password, a Tor. I hope they found them eventually, yeah? Everybody knows Kali, yeah? And then your attacker machine. Kali, we love Kali. I love Kali. It's a great tool, that type of stuff. Pin2 is getting a lot of press lately, so you might want to play with Pin2. Or better yet, build your own. As I said, build your own environment and then make sure you validate all that code you run. Because if you have high-end clients, like I said, in the many high millions or billions or even trillions of assets, you don't want to run code on there without knowing what it does. Right? So I know everybody loves to show all this cool exploitation, but unless you write that exploit, if you've totally vetted that exploit, be careful what you do. Now, at least the commercial vendors, if you go out and pay a big money for Core Impact and all the other commercial guys, at least they will stand behind their exploits. I hope. I don't know. I haven't found any of them yet. Nobody's been held liable for software yet, so maybe they won't either. Okay? And the inside machine, typically Windows, that's the most popular one to use, so you set up the Windows. And this is where you can set up any variant you want. So as Ben 10 said, just go in there and you start doing these PowerShell, the POSSEC, all that type of stuff he's got. Look for artifacts. What in there are indications of that tool's being run? And start identifying and build your auditing policies and those types of things, and you can start seeing those types of things taking place. Right? Because we know antivirus, signature-based detection, is not going to save us. There's no way it's going to save us because, let's face it, it's just behind the times. Right? I mean, signature-based technology is 10 plus years old, so that's an issue. Okay. And another thing you do is put in 2 network cards. I'll come around why that is here in a moment, but mainly because I can bind network cards to different ports. So when I bind the port, that risk is only from that subnet, right? So this is true segmentation isolation. If you go look at your machines today in your architecture, especially in your firewall architecture, your DMZ, your layered defense, if you're binding to 0.0.0.0, you are not doing good practices of defense. 0.0.0.0 is the wild card. That means all network cards or anything in that machine is going to have that port open from all segments. Don't do that. If you know it's in a segment, then bind it to the IP address of that segment. Right? That's the most important thing. You don't want to leave that attack surface from any side. Because the days are gone where we leave our internet on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If that segment doesn't need 24 hours a day, 7-day access, don't let it have that access. Turn it off. Put in time access control. You can do it in Cisco. They have time access control lists. You also have in the Smoothwall firewall where you can do time-based access. That's what you have to do today. You can't leave that attack surface 24 hours a day. Those days are gone. That was the good old days, right? Good old days gone forever, that type of stuff. Because the malware is too sophisticated. And we know the user is going to click. We can't stop our users from clicking. Please, if somebody knows how to stop them, then please let me know. Of course, how many have seen the website 2045.com? Yeah? Giving yourself immortality and all that type of stuff. Now, that's scary stuff, so maybe we can plant it in somebody's conscience to never click. But I still think they would still click, right? They'd deviate somehow and figure out how to click it. So, but that's okay if they click, because we've identified each segment, and the way you do it when you're doing your defense is you know every segment of your network, what's the ingress, the inbound traffic allowed, what's the outbound traffic allowed. And anything else is a red alert because you've been compromised. And put in the internal decoys, right? Those types of things. That's the way you have to do network defense today. And that's what after 25 years of being on offense, that's why I actually created a course, Advanced Network Defense, for EC Council Center for Advanced Security Training, because we can defend. There's things we can do to defend the network. It's not all doom and gloom as everybody tries to tell you, which has been good because we've seen a lot of people say the same thing here at the con. Let's get the basics right. Let's get the fundamentals and go from there, right? Start your research, lab it up, and test it. That's how you learn what you're doing. You build a lab environment, and you test what works and doesn't work. That's the key to testing, If you haven't done it in a lab environment, don't ever do it in a production environment. Don't go run it on a client's machine if you never ran it, just because you was at some nice little conference and you saw this really cool attempt that then says, oh yeah, let's just type this command in on the production network for the client. Doesn't work that way. Test it and test it again in your own environment. Know everything it does, how it works, the dependencies, the interlinks, everything that takes place on every piece of code you run. If you don't, you're not doing professional security testing the way you should be doing it. All right? Now, what happened nice, what I like about VMware, we used to have these things called teams. Yeah? A team was, I could set up 10 machines, 12 machines, whatever. I click on one link, and the team goes live. All right? Well, they've done away with it. Isn't that what always happens? But at least, fortunately, now they have these things called folders. And with folders, what I can do is, I can actually put virtual machines in a folder and allows me to power it on with one click. On and off with one click. 10-second delay in between. You can tweak that if you want. But this allows me to build all these complex architectures. And I'll give you an example. I have one of my clients in the Middle East is a bank. So we build the entire test architecture because, you know, it's that typical Cisco diagram I showed you earlier that the same Cisco engineer designed. So we have for the bank, we have a folder called the bank. We click on the bank folder, we bring it up, and we say, oh, look. We got a new vulnerability out there, a 0-day, because we're playing with exploit DB or we're looking at 0-day initiative or anything like that. Let's see where it impacts the bank. And we actually run it and bring it right onto the bank, and we can give them a report. This is, I've set up the first commercial security operations center in the country of Oman, and this is what we do. So we go to the bank and say, hey, you have this vulnerability because this new 0-day came out. This is your risk, and this is our recommended procedures. That's adding value to your clients. That's improving the security process. Even as pen testers, that's our goal, is to reduce the client's attack surface and improve their security process. And we do that by building our own cyber range, right? That's how we set it up. Okay, so here I've got my little test one. I'm doing OWASP, Broken Web Apps, Debian, and FreeBSD. So again, it's just setting up and building your own folder of entire enterprise architectures. That's why when you saw that one image, I had all those virtual machines. Because I use all those virtual machines for all these different teams that emulate all these clients' architectures. So anytime something comes up, we can identify it immediately. Yes, question? Oh yeah, I'm saying, what order do you boot in? It really doesn't matter unless you're using DHCP or other types of dependencies. Yeah? But in most cases, what I do, everything's static. Everybody agree in the firewall architecture, your layers, all that type of stuff? No DHCP. Everybody agree? No routing protocols. No matter what Cisco and everybody tries to tell you, no RIP, no any of that stuff. Do it all static. And if it's a segment and you know it's a point-to-point segment, you subnet it with a 252. Then it's only got the 2 endpoints. That's it. No IP addresses. That's not new. We was doing that 20 years ago when we put internet access to ships at sea. But everybody's forgot, right? Everybody thinks you've got a lot of well-respected people coming out and saying, oh, the perimeter's gone. There's no perimeter. Well, yeah, but how many of you have a car? Most people, yeah? Do you just, when you park it, do you walk off and leave the keys in it? No, why? You don't want somebody maybe to get in and drive it away with the keys in it. Plus, your insurance company's not too happy. Well, I just left the keys in it, right? Same thing. You still have to defend the perimeter. It may be different. The game has changed because of the expansion of everybody carrying smartphones, but it doesn't stop you from needing to defend the perimeter. You still have to have the perimeter defense. I don't care if the user clicks or not, because with segmentation, isolation, ingress, egress filtering, I can block the majority of the types of attacks. Because servers should never initiate a connection. 90% plus until 2012, attacks were all against servers. 2012, it switched over to mobile at 71%, and 74% being servers. But it doesn't matter, because if a server is there, a server is designed to receive traffic. First send packet out of a server, I'm going to red alert because that server has been compromised. Now, some people say, well, Kevin, we need Swift bank servers, because I know I work with a lot of banks, and the Swift servers need to talk to the internet and that type of thing. So what do? You put them on their own segment, point to point, subnetted with 252, and you mitigate that risk. We know there's no perfect security. So if we have to do something, we don't sit there and say it's too hard. We do it at the best level of risk and reduce the risk and attack surface to the best we can. You know, if it was perfect security, we all wouldn't be here right now. Right? So, yeah, we'd love to have perfect security, but we might be out of a job, so maybe it's better not to have perfect security. Well, we'll never have that problem because Windows 8, 80 million lines of code? Something like that? Some crazy thing like that. Okay? Planning. So when you do your information gathering, you identify your system, services, and software, right? Everybody out there, you've been your testing, first thing you do, your reconnaissance, all that type of stuff. You're identifying all these different systems, software, services in the client environment. As soon as you know that, you build your lab. You build your lab and start testing. You're looking for what works and doesn't work against this client's architecture. That's why I said the folders are perfect for this. So we build I've got a server with all this stuff. Of course, I don't do all this on my laptop. Server now, I finally got one with 384 gig of RAM. Anybody got a terabyte yet? I know we're getting close to a terabyte of RAM. I got 384 gig. I'm looking for terabyte. Terabyte someday, we just keep throwing more hardware at the problem, right? But what we do is we build folders for each client. So we know exactly each client, what they have, what they've got, and before we ever send one packet into that architecture, the production architecture, we've identified everything in that architecture that works and doesn't work. But we start with a flat network. And there's a big reason for this. If you can't attack it flat, you're never going to attack it through a filter. Okay? That's the thing you want to remember. If you can't get it flat, you're never going to get it through a layer of defense. That's just the way these architectures work. Right? So you want to understand that when you go in, you start doing your pen testing, that if you couldn't get it flat, you're probably not going to get it any other way. So move on and look for other ways. If social engineering is allowed, do the social engineering stuff that you've all seen already at some of the talks, stuff like that. Go on site, those types of things. Majority of the banks I deal with in the Middle East, North Africa, India, they don't want you anywhere near their premises. Okay? In fact, a couple of times they won't even allow me on their premises or near it, and I have to sit outside the gates and people come and report to me. Because they think I'm CIA. I don't know. Because it's like, I would never be a CIA. But it's funny because they're like, are you CIA? And I say, no. And they're like, well, could you tell me? Well, if I was CIA, I wouldn't be able to tell you. And that was enough for them. Very important, though, right here. Document what works and does not work. So when you go out into the actual environment to do your test, you already know what's worked and what doesn't work. And you go through your process, do your checklist, because whatever we test, we might get an administrator that went to one of the talks about defense, and he might tweak it a little bit. So as soon as we run through something that we know what it normally looks like, and we get a deviation when we look at it at the packet level, we need to figure out why that deviation is there. Is it because the administrator has maybe tweaked their settings a little bit different than what typically the actual installation looks like, right? That's our job as testers to figure that out. And then, of course, we can do some island hopping, pivoting, exploit proxy. These are all the advanced techniques we all love to do, yeah? This is the fun stuff. Let me exploit a box and pivot and go exploit some more and all that type of stuff, and we just go hopping around in the network, yeah? I hear the clapping, so I'm like, okay, where am I at on time? Okay. As you compromise assets, perspective of the attacker changes. Remember, TCP/IP was ratified in 1972. What was the size of the internet in 1972? Small, right? Really small. What are we running today? TCP/IP. What's the size of the internet today? Giant. And we're running on a protocol 40 years plus old that was never designed with security and is always looked at as a principle of trust. You trust people to who they say they are. So when we get deeper into the architecture, our position of trust changes, right? But that's why true segmentation isolation, when we flip the hat to defense, you shouldn't allow that. Ingress, egress. You know every point, what's allowed into that segment, what's allowed out of that segment. If anything deviates from that, you go into alert because somebody clicked. You got compromised. Okay. Located a point. We've done that. Yeah. So here we go. We got a hacker out here. Yeah, typical. A router, router, whatever you want to call it. Depending. I lived in England 11 years, so router. So you go through, and we happily, and we all love that because that's one of those diagrams. Yeah, we just hop along in the network, and we pivot at every point. Right? Now flip your hat to defense. This is an advantage to the defense. I have all kinds of things or segments in here. I can make it much more difficult on the attacker and give him a hard attack surface to do anything with, right? So what I can do is I can put in my ingress, egress points and make his day miserable if he does anything deviating from that. So what's some of the tricks I like to play with? Well, I can put a port out there, set it in one of the machines in here, one of my honeypots, my internal decoys, and bind to the port a 1 gigabyte file. So what happens when he starts playing with that port, does his little scanner, hits that port, and a 1 gigabyte file is coming back? He's sitting there wondering, what in the world's going on, right? And while he's doing that, remember, this was an internal decoy anyway. As soon as the decoy got one packet to it, we've already went into our escalation procedures. We've already identified the source, see where it's coming from, if it's really a real threat or what they are, and we're actually monitoring everything they do. That's the way you do defense today, okay? Then you get the exploit proxy, and what we do here now is, I just use Meterpreter, I get that actual box compromised inside, and I can deliver Metasploit as a payload. But you better make sure you vet that code and look at it and don't just deliver the default you downloaded from the internet or binaries or anything else because you don't know what it's actually doing on the network, right? These are all things you have to actually consider. Plus, the internal machines, most of us have private addressing. So I can't route to it from the internet anyway. So there's all kinds of little tricks that we have to do, right? Add to route, do all those types of things. So again, those are all to our advantage from the defense side. And we know if the hacker gets on our box, if he does a direct query to Google 8.8.8.8, drop it. None of your users should be querying Google. If they query Google on DNS, drop them. Don't allow them doing it. That's 90% of the malware uses the actual public internet DNS, right? 8.8.8, 4.2.2.1, and 4.2.2.2. UUNet is the other ones, the older ones, right? Same concept. We isolate it. We don't allow them to go out. Servers, any SIM packet going out, we drop it. We don't allow it out. Okay. Okay, so why? Because I think I'm running out of time, so I'll probably have enough time. So why do we do all this? I love this because I get this from people all the time. We already got all the best skills, Kevin. We don't need a range. Huh? So I tell everybody when I built the Network Operations Security Center out in England, when I went out there for the Navy and I was building it, we had a year before it was being actually put in. So the first thing I did, I started buying all this equipment. Well, I should say I started putting in to buy all this equipment because, I'm not the final signature. I'm just a chief. So it goes up and it goes to all my officers. And they all look at it and say, what is this? I said, what's my test lab? It's for my test lab. And what all my officers say? No. No. All the way up to the executive officer, no. But finally, the commanding officer, who fortunately had a little bit of computer background, stuff like that, he looked at it and says, what is this for? I said, it's my test lab because that way I can test everything before we put it in the Network Operations Security Center that's going to be feeding all the ships in the Norwegian Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean. He says, wow, that's important. So even though all his officers said no, he says, they don't know what they're talking about. He said yes. And we built the entire test lab environment, and we could emulate the entire Network Operations Security Center, including services to all the ships, all within that test lab. And that's why it's critical you have these, yeah? Okay? There's always excuses, yeah, that type of stuff. Now, I debated whether or not to show this, but I wanted to show it because... 2 minutes left? Good. I wanted to show it, but I knew I wouldn't get to my demo. 2 minutes? Yeah, always. Because... it's one of those things, being retired military, all that type of stuff. I don't like when things get leaked out in the world and all that type of stuff. Plus, you can't really believe what the media tells you half the time. But I wanted to show you because with the last probably 3 years ago, I've had clients that we literally, when we put equipment in, we would for 2 weeks have it in a room, a Faraday room, have spectrum analyzers around it and everything else, making sure that there was nothing in that hardware or in those systems that was trying to leak information. Yeah? So... you've got now Deity Bounce, which is Dell PowerEdge services. You exploit the motherboard BIOS, and you gain access to the operating system, planted into the BIOS of the Dell system. Yeah? So you want to, if you got a Dell, you want to put it on your cyber range, and you want to test this. All right? That's the method to this. Iron Chef, right? Persistence BIOS again. Okay? This one, Juniper. Anybody running Juniper? There's a lot of back doors out there in Juniper NetScreen firewalls, right? I'm not mentioning where they all came from. You guys can research and figure that out on your own. The reason my clients years ago had me doing spectrum analysis on all this equipment is this. Two-way RF communications in the BIOS plant of that Dell PowerEdge servers. Yeah? That's why we were doing spectrum analysis, and this was years ago and those types of things. So unless you created the hardware yourself, don't trust it. Lab it up and test everything. Okay? And I think that is the end. So there's my Virtual Pen Testing Labs book, published in June 2014. Anybody read this one? Advanced Penetration Testing for High Secure Environments by Lee Allen. Yeah? It's a great book. It was put out in 2012. Me and Lee were working on it together, but he's got like 6 kids. He has no time. So I'm writing the 2nd edition, and it should be out next time by ShowMeCon next year. 9 to 10 month process, and that is it. Any questions? Wow, no questions. Oh, wait, I got one. What? I got one. Well, the Unix, Linux VMs are pretty small. Oh, how much space? No, I mean, I run a 500 gig solid state drive on that one there, but my older laptop's only 750 gig. Yeah. It varies. I mean, you can always strip them down and make them smaller. I mean, one of our biggest damn VMs today is Kali. What happened to days when Kali was small? Huh? I think I just got you ever see the Butts just came out 1.10b. Actually, the updated 3.18 kernel. So I put it out. Oh, it's 9 gig. Apt-get update, apt-get distribution upgrade. OpenVAS 8. Well, that's great. Oh, the size went to 30 gig. Went from 9 gig to 30 gig. Huh? So Kali is taking up the most space nowadays. Almost Windows-like. Dare to say. Okay, great. Any other questions? Thanks a lot.